So you want to learn to knit, huh? Well, before we jump right in, we probably should familiarize ourselves with our tools and materials a little bit. So let's take a look at a few things here. First thing you're going to need is a set of knitting needles. This is typically what people think of when you think of knitting needles, some kind of stick with a point at the end and a stopper on the other end to keep your knitting from sliding off the other side. They come in all sorts of sizes and materials too. I've got some here that are made of bamboo, and then some here that are made of probably aluminum. But when you go to the store to look for materials, it can be kind of overwhelming. There's all kinds of stuff and you may not know what to actually get. So let's look at some other ones here. There are also these that are called double pointed needles. They have a point at each end, that's why they're called double pointed needles. And they usually come in a set of 4 or 5 of the same size. Now you can use these to knit scarves or whatever you want. Typically they're used to knit things that are knitted in the round. So things like socks or hats where you're basically just knitting one big long tube that you're going to end up putting on your foot or your head. There are also circular needles, which these are also used to knit things in the round as well. They're 2 needle tips at either end and then a long cord that connects them. And these cords vary in size, you know, from 4 inches, 3 inches, up to 30 some inches, 40 some inches long, depending on how big of a project you're working on. Now these can also be used to knit things that are flat too, not things that are knitted in the round. So, and this is typically what I use when I'm knitting. I use some kind of circular needle. Now a step up from this, and I'll show you what I have here. I've been using it today, so I have a project on it. But this is also a circular needle. The difference with this is this comes from a set of convertible needles where you can actually unscrew the needle off the end and put a different size on. So you have 3 or 4 cords of various lengths, and then you have all different sizes of tips that you can add to the different ends to give you the different sizes that you would need. The next thing that could be helpful is something like this. This is called a stitch marker. And this kind that I have here is a clippable stitch marker. You can unhook it like a safety pin and then clip it back again to whatever you are attaching it to. You don't have to have stitch markers. They are helpful, especially in larger projects where you're wanting to mark a certain location in the project, if you're, you know, having to increase in certain places or do some kind of fancy stitch or something like that. They also make other kinds that are just plastic or metal hoops that you just slide onto your knitting needle. In a pinch, I've also used paper clips before, or you can even just use just a piece of scrap yarn that you just tie into your work as well to mark that area. And of course, last but not least, you're going to need yarn. Yarn comes in all kinds of different weights, textures, materials, all kinds of stuff. This one here is a fine weight. This is a 1. If you can see on here, it tells you the weight of the yarn. This one is a super fine, which is used for making things like socks. They go up in, you know, this is typical size. This one is a 4 weight. You can see that there. This is a 4. This is called worsted weight. If you see in a pattern, it calls for worsted weight yarn. It's calling for a 4 weight yarn. But they do get bulkier than that. This one is a 5 weight. So it's used for thicker projects. And usually the thicker the yarn and the larger the needles that you use, the faster the project works up. And this one's a 6 weight. You can see how much thicker that one is. And, you know, they go up to, you know, very super bulky kind too, that you've seen people who knit blankets with their hands and or use their arm to knit something. That's usually a big thick, it's usually a 7 weight for that. So I hope that familiarizes you a little bit with what you're going to be using. If you're confused about what size needles to buy for the type of yarn you've got, there is a guide on the package. Once again, if you look here, it tells you. This one says a 4mm US size 6 knitting needle. So when I'm going to pick out my needle, I will look on the side of it, or sometimes printed on the end. It tells you what size needle to use. This one's actually way too big. This one's a 10mm. That one's too big. That's an 11, so that's even bigger. So you just look for the printing on there, and that will tell you which one to buy. Okay, so I hope that helps, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll talk about casting on and actually getting started.